Today we're answering the question that everyone wants to know. Can I still drink alcohol and lose weight? Come with me, let's find out. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Paul, again at Fitnessgeektv. Today we're looking at alcohol and whether that nightly glass of Pinot is really going to affect those weight loss goals. When it comes to alcohol, it's quite easy just to think of it in terms of calories only. And that's certainly one of the areas that we're going to look at today. But there are a few other areas that we need to be aware of as well. So we're going to break down today's video into four main areas. We're going to look at the caloric content, we're going to look at the effect on blood sugar, the effect on your sleep, and also how alcohol affects you in terms of the food choices you make after you've had a drink. We're going to hit each one by one, and then we're going to finish off with a few practical ways that you can start to maybe reduce your alcohol intake, but also a few hacks of how you can still enjoy a drink without letting it ruin all your hard work. So make sure you stick around to the end. All right, let's get into it. So let's look at the caloric content first. So this is usually the main area that people think about, the main reason really when they think about alcohol affecting their weight. So let's have a look at the main culprits when it comes to that caloric density. Here you can see a really cool infographic that I got from healthily.com. So thanks to them for allowing me to use their graphic. You can find their link to their site down below. So this looks at wine calories first of all. From this infographic you'll see that there are differences in terms of caloric content for the different types of wines. So on one end, on the left side here, you'll see light alcohol sweet wine, so around 111 to 150 calories, all the way up to sweet dessert wine, which is around about 190 to 275. And you'll see even within those categories there's quite a broad difference as to how many calories it will contain. Probably the main thing to look at here is the serving size. So this relates to a serving size of around about 6 ounces or around about 177 milliliters. So that would be the caloric content labelled for a glass at that size. I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone that sticks to 177 milliliters of wine. So it's obviously a great idea to make sure that you keep track of the total quantity to get a better idea of how many calories you're consuming. Okay, so what if you're a beer drinker, not a wine drinker? So this next graphic, again from winefolly.com, so allows us to compare slightly some light beers, lagers, ales, Belgian beers, and imperial IPAs, and you'll see again that the caloric content is a little bit different as we work down that list. So perhaps, if caloric content is something you're concerned about, there's maybe some slightly better options than others. You will see with the beer that typically they do have a greater ratio of carbohydrates relative to wine. So around 9 to 19 for wine and around about 15.5 to 22.5 for beer. And this last slide maybe helps to compare some of the other drinks that you might consider as well. So this is actually the carbohydrate content in alcoholic beverages. So a couple of interesting things to note here. So we've got alcohol on the left hand side. So that will include things like distilled spirits down at 0, so no carbs. Then you've got some dry wine, dry red or white, low carb beer, no sparkling, and then all the way up to the highest carbohydrate content, which is Kahlua on this list. So what you can see is there may be a slightly more of an advantage to choosing something like a distilled spirit as compared to, say, a wine or a beer, and that definitely might be the case. What you do have to consider though is obviously what you're mixing your alcohol with. So if you are adding mixers to your vodka or rum, for example, then obviously that's going to have a major effect on not only carbohydrates but caloric content in total. So let's move on to blood sugar. So the next point we're looking at here is how alcoholic drinks affect blood sugar and what that means for you. The first thing to note about alcohol and blood sugar is that alcohol by itself obviously doesn't contain any carbs or sugar. So if you're drinking distilled spirits, then that's going to be the best from that point of view. Like I said earlier, if you are mixing, let's say Coke, for example, obviously then that is going to affect potentially the carbohydrate content of that drink. So that's going to affect then your blood sugar and obviously your propensity then to store body fat. What people don't always understand is the effect of alcohol on lowering your blood sugar, which has a couple of major impacts. The first thing we usually want to do when our blood sugar drops too low is obviously eat. This definitely can affect the food choices that we would normally make. I know you've probably experienced it as I have, having a couple of glasses of wine or a couple of beers, and then you're definitely going to be less careful about the food choices you make after. So this brings us on to our next topic, which is sleep, because hypoglycemia can have an important effect in sleep as well. So if you're one of those people that thinks alcohol actually helps you sleep, then you're definitely in for a rude awakening. Pun intended. In fact, alcohol intake actually reduces your sleep quality. In his excellent book, Why We Sleep, Matthew Walker talks about how alcohol actually reduces your REM sleep. And especially if you're drinking regularly every night, then you might actually end up with a shortage of REM sleep, almost like a REM sleep debt, which your body has to pay back later. So we almost come full circle here now, because we also know that lack of quality sleep will actually increase your body's tendency to store body fat. When our sleep is poor, our insulin sensitivity is reduced, and that effectively is like making you diabetic the next day. The vicious cycle then continues, because the next day you don't feel great, you're tired, you lack sleep, and then again your food choices that you're going to make will be impacted and probably will be worse. Then there's the other added impact. Because you're tired, you're probably less likely to work out that next day. So then we get into this vicious downward spiral of eating poorly, sleeping poorly, working out less, and storing more body fat. Okay, so those are the main areas to consider when thinking about your alcohol consumption, but let's go through a few things that potentially could help you still enjoy a drink from time to time. So the first, and probably the most obvious solution, is just to drink less. There are a couple of ways you can do this, obviously by limiting the amount of times that you actually drink during the week. What I would tend to do is to try and schedule your days that you'll enjoy a glass of wine, so maybe on a Friday or a Saturday night. As long as you've had a good productive week, you can treat yourself to that glass of wine on a Friday night. The other solution is just to use smaller glasses. It sounds a bit silly, but it's actually quite an effective way to eliminate the mindless drinking that we often do. So obviously if you're having to top up your glass more often, you'll be much more aware if you're drinking more. And that mindless drinking is something that's really common. It's that same situation where you're in the cinema eating a bag of popcorn, you're barely tasting it, you're just eating mindlessly, and before you know it, you're at the bottom of the bag. So try to enjoy your glass of wine or your beer, but drink mindfully, enjoy it, but don't overconsume. Next tip is to only have wine in the house when you're going to drink it. Chances are that if you've got a huge wine fridge in your house, the temptation is always there just to have a glass of wine at the end of the night. So only buy alcohol when you actually want to drink it. And if you're one of those people that just can't stand seeing a half-drunk bottle of wine, then it's a good idea just to buy a wine resealer, like a little wine vacuum with a cork, so then it'll stay fresh for the next night. Another simple solution would be just to replace some of your alcoholic drinks with non-alcoholic alternatives. So on a night out or at dinner, you might just alternate between one alcoholic drink, one non-alcoholic, and that way overall through the rest of the night you're going to consume less. On a similar note, a lot of people I work with, they tend to be quite concerned about appearances when they go out. If they're not holding an alcoholic drink, people tend to want to know why and why they're spoiling the party and so on. So a simple trick is to have a glass of sparkling water with ice and lemon, and it just looks like a gin and tonic. Challenging yourself and your friends to a month of alcohol-free living is a great way to not only to potentially get your health goals back on track, but to really understand and feel how alcohol's been affecting you over time. Keeping a journal of how you're feeling, how you're sleeping, how your energy levels are, your concentration and focus at work, for example, and also keep a journal of your weight, your body measurements. And on that note, if you haven't already seen it, check out my videos on goal setting and assessing your starting point, which will really give you a good insight into what you need to measure. And lastly, the final tip is to do with food. Two things you can do when you're about to have a drink is to make sure you have a good high protein, higher fat meal, and that should help stave off any blood sugar dips later on. And also what I would do is to make sure you've got something in the house that's healthy that you can eat later on. So maybe make a nice meal and keep that in the fridge for when you return. One more thing before you go, please make sure you like this video. Chances are that if this video has helped you at all, if you've enjoyed any of the tips I've given you, chances are it will help someone else too. And just by you clicking that like button will really help to get my video in front of more people. So I'd be really grateful if you could do that. And don't forget to subscribe as well. And when I release new videos every week, you'll be the first one to know. Okay guys, take care, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon.